This afternoon is going to be a bunch of varied talks. This one, as a nerd, I'm pretty excited about the next one. If you're building an AI-focused company or simply trying to adopt AI into your organization, measuring impact is really hard. Measuring impact in general is hard. Measuring impact of AI is even harder. So our next talk is about hitting on a couple really interesting topics: the limitations of conventional metrics, holistic approach, including the financial and operational considerations of AI, and hearing practical examples across a bunch of different industries to see what actually works. From the source, from the investment director of Scaled AI, Yassine Lazraq. Everyone give him a hand. Come on up.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you very much for this intro. So I'm going to talk to the two people that learned something this morning. I think the others are not going to learn anything. But yeah, today's presentation is slightly different from probably what you've heard this morning. It's not really about any AI model or any application of AI on a specific industry or vertical. It's about the next step. Once you have your model, once you have your use case, how do you measure success? How do you measure the return on innovation, right? There's obviously a wordplay on investment and innovation, but how do you measure that? How do you track your performance for a specific AI model? AI is relatively new, so assessing impact on AI is also something new and not always easy to do. So let's try to talk about it together. As an FYI, yeah, this presentation is going to be given in English. If you have any question in English, in French, any of the 3.5 languages that I speak, n'hésitez pas, avec grand plaisir. All right. A bit of background about myself. I'm Yassine Lazraq. I'm an investment director at Scale AI. Before that, I was in the quant research space in an investment bank at JP Morgan in London. All of that to say that I have some experience in the analytics space, and I've learned that what you do is important, but how you measure and how you communicate what you do is probably even more important. So let's see how that applies to AI. Yeah, so as a bit of an intro, I'll start by very briefly present who we are, Scale AI. The goal is not to bore you. It's really to explain why we're doing what we're doing and give you a bit of background on our general framework. So Scale AI is one of the 5 superclusters created back in 2018 that's funding project leveraging AI towards value chain issues, operational issues. We're based in Montreal, but we're completely agnostic in terms of geography, as long as it's in Canada. We have a set of programs that are meant to be accompanying companies throughout their AI journey, from training towards pilot project, towards the part that I cover, which is larger investment projects. And this is the important part. So when we do what we do, which is funding projects, obviously we need to, one, assess the impact of what we do, and we look at, and 2, communicate that, right? So what kind of figures, metrics, KPIs, our internal KPIs do we use? Okay, obviously your classic co-investment amount, number of projects that you can see on the screen, number of participants, and the last one is pretty interesting, total direct value generated by those projects. So this is the sum of revenue increase and cost decrease incrementally generated by the AI project we have funded so far. Roughly 120, I would add 5% to every row, because this is, I think, 2 months old. But roughly, yeah, 5 billion-ish in terms of direct value. This is a very impressive number. We do believe in that number. This is part of what we do is generate value, obviously, in Canada. But we've come to understand that this is not enough to communicate what we do. Before we go into that, and classic KPIs and our suggested approach, very briefly, I've displayed here a value chain of the kind of use cases we've seen. This is your typical value chain diagram a la Porter, where I depicted some use cases we've seen so far, right, across those 120, 130 projects, which obviously span logistics, operations, et cetera, et cetera. You know those, right? You've heard a lot about those. They apply to all industries. All of the industries that have been described today, they apply to them. It's absolutely fine. a lot of what I'm going to say is 100% agnostic to the industry and the vertical. It really applies to everything AI. All right, so let's go into the nitty-gritty of the KPIs themselves. So I'm not going to explain what a KPI is, right? You all know what a KPI is. You have your typical business KPIs, revenue increase, cost decrease, job creation, training, etc., etc. Historically, and when I joined Scale AI, it was still the case, those are the ones we're tracking. And on top of the AI-related metrics and the technical stuff, those are the ones we're tracking to assess the impact of any project we're funding. Those are good, don't get me wrong. If I take a typical Scale AI project, so let's take your retailer, right, which has a bunch of issues and implementing AI to solve those issues, say, minimizing stockouts, for example, then asking them about the revenue increase due to the AI model they're going to implement, let's say a demand forecasting model, right, that's going to reduce their stockouts, that's going to increase their revenue. Makes sense. Same thing, they're going to have less waste, so you think that's going to diminish their costs as well, right? Stocking costs. By doing that, they're going to hire people to develop those models, job creations, etc., etc. So that's fine. And usually those people, the companies submitting to Scale AI, and again, this is really for any company, any AI team that's doing an AI project, you can try to associate this project, those impact to a set of KPIs. So let's say I'm going to increase my revenues by 2 million by implementing this model. I'm a retailer. OK, those numbers are going to be shared with us. However, and this is the starting point of why we're moving something else, is we think there's a bunch of issues with just looking at the KPIs. I would describe this into 5 different buckets of issues. One is there is a, and this is 1 and 2 actually, there's a clear disconnect between the teams implementing the AI, the operational teams on the ground, and the team providing the business numbers, the business KPIs, right? Usually those are very often disconnected. If it's a large corporation, they're definitely disconnected. If it's a smaller corporation, it's very hard for that same team to get both figures, which means that we're going to get them late. And it's going to be very hard to understand those numbers. One thing that happens very often is the companies are not able to isolate the impact of what they're doing compared to other stuff that can impact revenues or the costs. If I take back my example, you're increasing your revenue because you're doing a forecasting model, right? Fine. But maybe the number you're giving me for revenue is also impacted by your marketing campaign that you also add in. It's very hard to distinguish the former from the latter, right? And it makes sense. That's something we understand. You need a lot of sophistication to be able to track an AI model to a particular business KPI. So knowing all of those issues, right, the goal was at Scale AI, at our level, and this is really work in progress, how do we come up with something else that would help into assessing the impact of the project, not only our project, but any AI project, and would sit in the middle between the AI work, the AI models, and the business KPIs, right? So to bridge that gap, what we're suggesting is to add a layer of what we call operational metrics. So this is one, operational, really linked to the operation of the company and what's being done. And 2, sitting between the 2 teams, the 2 metrics, the AI models, and the KPIs. So if I take my example, right, retailer doing demand forecasting model, his AI metric is going to be diminishing, reducing, minimizing the error in his model. His business KPI is increase of revenue, fine. But that mid layer is going to be that stock out diminution. So they're going to increase their revenue because they're going to reduce the stock out by 2%. So that's the number we're going to ask for. That's the number we're going to challenge. And this is the number we're going to track in our investment as part of delivering the actual deliverables of that AI model. It can be obviously one project can have more than one operational metric. It usually has. So here they can also reduce lead times for them, right? If they're also optimizing that, et cetera, et cetera. If there's a layer of promo, once they know their demand, they have the correct stock, they also want to push the stock they want to push. Maybe there's a layer of revenue management. So this is another metric they're adding on top. But having a set of those metrics would definitely, from experience and what we've seen so far, help into solving some of the issues I was mentioning. So to the delayed feedback, to the difficulty in separating what's coming from the model from what's coming from else, this is helping, definitely. Because if you're only tracking the stockouts, you don't add another extra layer to that. You can really isolate the impact and can share that information with all stakeholders, the AI specialists and the business people that both understand this number and both can opine on its validity or not. So obviously, so I have a set of, so that was as of, say, 1.5 years ago. So we knew that. We knew that we needed that middle layer, right, in our KPI onion to track the results a little bit better and communicate them better with the client themselves. So what kind of metrics should we have? Instead of trying to set up a framework and fit our projects into it, we adopted the bottom-up approach, where we started with everything we had at the time, 100-ish projects, right? We looked at all of them, and we tried to figure out with every project what kind of metrics would be applicable. If they were mentioned, fine. If they were not, coming back to the project, discussing with the stakeholders, and coming and trying to figure out ourselves what the metrics is. And in doing that, we ended up with this categorization of metrics. It's by no means exhaustive. It's really a 80-20 kind of approach, where you capture most of your metrics in a limited number of buckets. The goal, obviously, is to not end up with 300 categories. That would make sense, right? We want to have a finished number of categories that you can aggregate, sum, average out, report on, create bucket on, etc., etc. Those metrics, hopefully, are very clear, very straightforward. They're meant to be this way. You have your efficiency metric. Think of any LLM, any generative AI model that's usually tackling efficiency issues, time savings towards a business unit in processing ad hoc or saving time for our resource. Then you have your accuracy metric. Think of a manufacturing process, right, with a set of errors that can happen that you want to minimize, or any predictive maintenance AI model, for example, which has a set of error. You want to reduce your error rate. So this is accuracy that you're targeting, right? You have your productivity metric, and this is 1.5 metric, right? Because you can either see it as throughput optimization. You're doing more with the same resources, or the other, you flip the coin, other way around, doing the same thing with less resources. We think of that as productivity kind of metrics. And finally, they don't really fit in the first 3 categories, anything revenue, anything pricing. Those are revenue management kind of projects, optimization, etc., etc. So we found that pretty much all of our projects do fit in those categories, and it becomes much easier to, one, track them, to average them out and understand them, and have a good range, good understanding of the kind of range you'd expect for any bucket or any category. I've provided a few examples here. I've already given a few. I think the main thing to understand is, again, I'm repeating myself, this is absolutely industry agnostic. You can have efficiency metrics in human resources optimization, right? You can have accuracy in manufacturing, like I said. In healthcare, yeah, right? If you're doing imaging, cancer detection, reducing number of errors in that, that's in healthcare. You can have productivity in a bunch of other things, in oil and gas, in manufacturing. You can have pricing, yes, on pricing projects, with anything where you're increasing operation and you have a revenue angle, that applies to as well. So any industry. And that makes it very good, right? So you can aggregate across different industries, something that you naturally apply to one industry and one vertical. That's amazing. That's amazing for us, right? To have a better understanding on what AI can provide and help customers, help clients, giving them some feedback on what we've seen, right? And help the other stakeholders we communicate with, sharing those numbers and explaining what AI can do. And AI can do a lot of things. Obviously, you know that. You've had that one morning's worth of sessions. In those 2-3 next slides, so what we did after that is look at our project and try to represent the kind of impact we see on our particular project. I'm not naming any specific projects in here. Trying to come up with, here I've used box plots, right, as a good way to represent this. This is by no means definitive. We're still improving our numbers, improving our methodology, improving our categorization. So if you come back next year it would be better. This presentation would be even better with more statistical data, obviously. And one interesting thing that you can see here is the median, which is obviously you know what a box plot is. It's the line in the middle is very often lower than the average. Average in absolute terms, right? Average out. What that says, and we've seen it a lot with the KPIs, is some projects have a tendency to overestimate KPIs, right? You always have outliers, that makes sense, but those outliers, especially when you have revenue increase for larger companies that completely dwarf other smaller projects, makes the whole number, the aggregate number, very hard to follow and very hard to understand. So using this, you can articulate your vision a little bit better. You can isolate those outliers, a little bit better. You can have a full-on understanding of the kind of impact you are delivering as an AI team or as an AI funding company. I provided a few examples here. I'm not going to go into the details of that. But again, industry agnostic, you have construction, you have manufacturing, etc., etc. And same thing applies for the other metrics, throughput, capacity, same order of magnitude, right, 10-ish%, with obviously projects that have higher impact, projects that have lower impact, projects that have way too big impact, right, than they're supposed to be, but it makes sense. I'm not saying that the companies are inflating the numbers. Not the case at all. Again, it's coming back to this point that it's very hard to assess the individual impact of your AI model on your business unit KPI. That's really it. That's why we come up with this. And so finally, before I open the door to questions, right? If I come back to AI models, right? You have your model set that you use to develop your model data, and then you have your test set of data that you test your model on. That's what we did. We started on our usual stream of projects, and then we looked at this stream of projects that we funded last year, which is very, very exciting stream of projects, centered around healthcare. So we funded a few projects led by hospitals that were tackling with AI their operational issues. We took our framework and we applied it to these projects and these use cases. And you can see here a few numbers coming from a few of those projects, bucketed into the three main categories. Obviously, you don't expect to have as many projects targeting revenue management in hospitals. Hopefully, it's not the end goal, right? But you can see efficiency metrics, right? Like reducing over time. You can see accuracy metrics, right? Admissions, optimizing admission. That's something that came up a lot. And you can see a lot of productivity metrics, patient from intangible ones like patient satisfaction or retention of staff in ER, or there are a lot of projects trying to allocate beds and doctors to patients. So all of those metrics related to that, et cetera, et cetera. So we're happy to see that this specific framework that we came up with a different set of projects absolutely applied to very small contained stream of projects. So yeah, that's basically it. It's really work in progress. So if anybody has a better idea, and I'm sure there are lots of better ideas on how we can improve that, please feel free to come to me and talk about it, right, on your particular AI project or in general. And as a key takeaway, pretty obvious one, that you need to track what you're doing. That makes sense, but it's not because you're doing something technical that you need to stop at the technical part of your model. Having a model with 0.1 error rates shouldn't be the end goal. Your end goal should be to have a model that delivers something that you can communicate and track throughout its duration and lifetime with all forms of stakeholders, right? Your C-suite, your AI team, your external stakeholders, et cetera, et cetera. It's very, very important. So point 2 is KPIs are an important tool because they're easy to understand. Everybody knows what a KPI is. But sadly, we found that they are not enough. They're not enough to conservatively and precisely track the impact of your AI models. And this is why you've came up with this framework of metrics, which is sitting between the two layers, right? And that can be of help for you to track the results of what you're doing. So before I open the doors to any question, obviously you have my details on the presentation if you want to reach out. But I'm more importantly interested in your question if you have any. Any question? Nope. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. That's the natural thing to do, right? You have an AI model, you talk to your business team, to your CFO or business team, and they say, okay, we think that revenue is going to increase by 10%. This is the number we're going to give them. This is the number we're going to use. But how do you separate your forecasting model that's optimizing the stock out from everything else that can increase the revenues in that same business unit? It's very hard. It's really very hard, right? We've never been able to see it clearly done. So that's why we're adding this layer, which is easier to articulate for the AI team doing the work and the business team consuming the end result. Any other question? All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for your presence. Hopefully it was of interest, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions. Thank you.